that's more specific, but do you want to mention?
Well, I'll say a couple of things, Mr. Miller. The first thing, well, I'll say three things really. Conscious the Secretary of State has offered a classified briefing on this. The first point I would make is that if the British Army was asked to fight tonight,
yes,
it would fight tonight. And I don't think anybody in this room should be under any illusion that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe tonight, then we would meet them in that fight. That would be the first point I'd make. Secondly, and as we go through the classified briefing, can we sit here and say that 3 UK division carries no operational risk whatsoever? Of course not. There are a range of operational risks and operational strengths associated with that division, and that is exactly what the Strategic Defence Review is addressing. We've spoken at this committee before about a munitions strategy and a munitions plan. We know we need more lethality. We haven't been secret about that. The Secretary of State has talked about stepping up some of those joint enablers that we need to do. So, of course, there are areas that we're addressing through the SDR. But my third point would be critical to responding is ensuring that we can respond and adapt. And the ability to respond and adapt is absolutely lies at the heart of our industrial strategy. And we're seeing this playing out in Ukraine. It's the ability for Ukraine itself and those allies of Ukraine that can respond and provide whatever they need, or in our case, whatever the alliance needs in the case of a major conflagration with Russia, is able to have the industrial strength to respond. And that is why so much of what we're doing is through the SDR, and what we've done up to the SDR is about absolutely embedding a sovereign industrial base and an allied industrial base as well, because the situation changes on the ground, as you well know.
General,
thank you.
Just one second.
Thank you, General. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely certain that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe, the British Army would be there. I'm a reserve officer, so I would probably be there with them.
We're there now, of course, in Estonia.
We are, but in force.
And
in force.
We're ready.
Just one gloss. Obviously, the General has talked about close engagement with NATO. As we think through our part in Sakyer's plans in the event of warfighting with Russia, what we contribute where and when would reflect those plans with Sakyer, and it might be on the Eastern Front very quickly, or it may be elsewhere, so that we do need a degree of flexibility in our response.
Yeah.
And of course, we commit the largest part of our armed forces across the board to NATO. We commit our independent nuclear deterrent to NATO. We have around 1,000 people in NATO institutions. We have 3 significant NATO centres in the UK, from the Maritime Command to the Innovation Centre to the ARC. So we make a massive contribution to NATO. More is asked of us, as it is of all nations, and I want to ensure that we meet those asks, and those asks are consistent with what we will do to develop our forces and strength in the future.
Very briefly, Emily Allbuck wanted to come in on this issue.
Just on this issue, a very quick question from me. You'll be aware that the previous iteration of this committee before the general election, in our Ready for War report, said that our armed forces aren't ready for a high intensity war. Has that changed? That report came out in February. Has there been any change to that situation?
Well, we discussed this, I think, at the last committee,
did.
And I think you said we will have to agree to disagree, I think is
Yes.
what your words. Because I made the point that we are ready to go to war. But I also made the point that there are operational risks associated with sustaining that war. And I think the previous Secretary of State said that, reminded ourselves, whatever the context, we'll be fighting as an alliance of 32 member states. And so looking at this in isolation of a particular country, I think masks the fact that the strength of the alliance is the 32 nations within it. But we'll go back to the point, and the Secretary of State's been on record for saying it, we've got more to do to ensure that we can endure the fight. And that's what the SDR is about.
I think just wanted to come on that.
We made the conversation well, General, and we did agree to disagree. So the key question which you just slightly touched on then is how resilient would our army be? In other words, how long could we keep them in the field?
Well, I mean, fighting, as a number of people in this room know, fighting power is not just about equipment and capability, it's about the moral component. And the moral component is about staying in the fight. And I'm wholly confident that every member of the British Armed Forces has the moral component to sustain the fight. In terms of capability, we've been clear that we need to we're going over old ground.
Sorry, I'm talking about resilience. Mm-hmm. So you can put an army in the field for how long for?
Well, you wouldn't expect us
and
here.
I quite understand we have equipment.
You wouldn't expect us on live.
As you can guess, we've been around a bit, so we understand that bit.
You wouldn't expect us on live television to tell ourselves exactly how many munitions types we have against a certain scenario.
But the resilience is
about resilience.
Yes. The resilience is a really important question, and Ukraine reminds us of this truth that your armed forces are only as strong as your industry that stands behind them, and that's why the general laid stress on the fact that the reforms that we're trying to lead now on a defence industrial strategy aren't just what we're embarking on now and expect to be accelerated after the strategic defence review. These are a really necessary component of being able to fight more effectively and being better prepared in the future. It's one of the reasons why we were so badly exposed when Russia did invade Ukraine. It took 287 days for the government then to get a contract in place for fresh production of NLAWs. It took more than 500 days to get a fresh contract in place for new ammunition. That was because our industry was not in a place that was resilient, as Mr. Twigg is arguing, in order to support a fight in the future.
Thank you very much. No doubt we will look into these issues within the classified briefing. I fully appreciate what the General said, that we can't discuss that within the public session. But now I'd like to move on, given the lack of time, on to personnel issues. Ian Room, please.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary of State, for being here with the panel. Obviously, any forces is only as good as its personnel. You can come up with all the strategic plans, but without the personnel, we've got no armed forces. You've acknowledged yourself, Secretary of State, in September that the MOD has a massive problem in recruitment and retention. And I know yesterday you went some way of addressing that with some of the pinch points. Could you tell us what steps you are taking to address the recruitment and retention problem within the armed forces?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Room. This is, I'm pausing only because I really want to emphasise that we're a government now that will place people at the heart of our defence plans, and we're now facing what are deep-set problems. And those deep-set problems run over the last 14 years, where recruitment targets were set and missed every year, where in the last year service morale fell to record lows, and over the last year where our forces were losing 300 full-time personnel, more than were joining every month. So the start that we're making and the steps that I'll outline now, I want to emphasise, are just a start. And when you have those deep-set problems and established trends, being able to reverse them and then recover the situation will take time, can't be done overnight. So I think the first significant step for me was being able to award the largest pay increase for our armed forces for over 20 years this summer, and to be able to say now, as the first ever Defence Secretary, that everyone in a uniform will be paid at least a national living wage. The second step on pay, which is a feature of the some frustrations that forces personnel have, as you say, Mr. Room, I announced yesterday, which are for two groups where we have a particular concern to hold on to their expertise and to keep them in service. We're putting in place particular incentive retention payments. And so those are the tri-service aircraft engineers, a scheme which will come in from April, and those soldiers, private and lance corporal ranks, who have served for 4 years, and having put the investment, having got these skilled, trained personnel, we want to hang on to them. Beyond that, we recognise also that it's often the feelings of the families who stand with and support personnel that influence their decision whether to stay or go. And so on Monday, you may recall that we announced the extension of childcare provision and support for those personnel serving overseas, likely to be around 2,700 personnel will benefit from that. And then we've changed some of the, if you like, the rules and restrictions that stop people who want to join being able to join the forces. I'm really struck, and I feel this very deeply. Some people say, look, young people today, they've got no interest in serving the country and serving in uniform. But over the last 10 years, more than 1 million young people have applied to join the forces. Mm-hmm. The problem is that more than 3/4 of them just give up on the application because they never reach the point where they're rejected or they're recruited. So we've swept away some of the really historic restrictions on people joining. We're setting up a new direct route for those who have cyber skills and cyber interest to join the forces in that role. And we're now working with all 3 services to put in place really tight turnaround targets for people who apply to be able to be assessed and either rejected or given a training offer. And that we hope will help drive the system as well. But we've got a lot more to do. Those are the starts that we've made.
Coming back onto that, obviously I've raised questions in Parliament, and it was only raised to you this week as well in Parliament around the medical assessments and capita taking the long recruitment times. I personally know individuals within my constituency where they've been delayed over 10, 11 months before they can actually get seen, and some of these are referred to me from serving officers who are quite high ranking as well, and they acknowledge that. And one of your ambitions that you set out in September was to set the MOD a target of reducing them waiting times, and I think within confirmation of a training start date within 30 days and an application process within 10 days. How far is the MOD away from achieving those targets?
We're some way at the moment, but the purpose of setting targets is to say, first of all, if you or I weren't fortunate enough to be members of Parliament and we were in the jobs market, we wouldn't really expect to be waiting more than a month for some sort of response from any employer that we were applying to. There's no reason why our forces should not be capable of responding in the same way. And frankly, if we don't, we lose good people. We lose good people who will go elsewhere, especially in a tight labour market, which we've got now. So we're some way off, but I hope to be able to come back to this committee in the course of next year and be able to give you a good update report that says we're getting closer. But you can see the scale of the transformation, not just in thinking, but in the system of being able to recruit that will be required to meet those targets.
Right, thanks.
Just stressing the Armed Forces Recruitment Programme, which will go live in 2027, will see a fully digitised pipeline, which we believe is one of the heart of the problems of people taking so long, because quite often it's not easy to track where they are, but this digitisation will greatly improve what you've just said and help us meet those targets.
So obviously the Aythornthwaite report that was published, while they were doing the investigation, obviously the Ukraine war started, so it influenced some of that report. How far is the MOD and your department in actually actioning those recommendations that was recommended by the Aythorn report?
Yep. So this was probably the first systematic look at the range of things that affect morale, recruitment, retention that had been taking place for years. It was very valuable and I thought very comprehensive, even though it was commissioned under the previous government. David, do you want to give Mr. Rumour an update on the
yes.
departments, how far the department is with the different elements of it?
Mr. Rooms, you'll appreciate we didn't get to formally publishing a government response to the Haven